Welcome back. You're watching Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Karel Lahara. Want to turn our attention now to something that is gaining international attention, and that is, of course, the long awaited return of Simone Biles to the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. Want to take this tweet here in full for you from the Mental Health Coalition. It says this. We applaud Simone Biles for opening up about her mental health and the new documentary, Simone Biles Rising. As we tune into the exciting athletic events ahead, remember that even the most extraordinary athletes are human and everyone has their own mental health experiences. I would like to continue on this conversation by bringing in Dr. Richard Trammel. He is a mental health specialist that works with athletes. Dr. Richard, thanks so much for joining us here today. Tell us really about the importance of, first of all, what Simone Biles did during the last games. She stepped away to work on her mental health. How important is that for athletes, especially when you talk about these high stakes games that they participate in?
I think it's important to note that Simone Biles is an extraordinary athlete, a very special athlete. And so, according to her, she had been suffering with years of trauma, and all of a sudden it just popped up into her subconscious mind in the form of a mental block of a move that she had been doing for years. Fascinating, right? And so it wasn't like she couldn't do the move. According to Simone, that the trauma, what had been happening to her in the past, was the cause of her failure. So then therapy helped her, get through this. It's extremely brave of her to come forward because most athletes do not want to think that they have some kind of a mental issue, but it's got nothing to do with her being mentally ill. Now, that is a huge distinction. She was not mentally ill. And so she was just concerned about her mental health due to trauma that had happened in the past. Now, I would like to make a distinction here. Most athletes that are suffering and struggling with this thing called fear of failure is due to performance anxiety. And I deal with that literally on a daily basis with my clients. And so this usually, now I say usually, comes from enormous expectations that are placed upon an athlete. And there's an old adage in the game of golf, which is my subspecialty: the harder you try, the worse you do. It's a cruel circle. It's a very cruel circle. And if an athlete starts working harder and harder and harder, they start doing worse and worse and worse. Their expectation goes up, up, and up. Many times that will lead straight to termination.
This fear of failure is something that kind of connects us all as humans. It's not just athletes that go through this. I myself go through that as well. And you do feel that mental block. But maybe if you could explain to our viewers a little bit more about how that even comes about. I think that when people don't understand the subject too well, they think, oh, well, she's done it before, they've done it before. Why can't they just do it now? How does that work within the human psyche?
Comes from the subconscious mind, and depending on the age of the athlete, it's been my experience, depending on the age of the athlete, is the causation of the fear. So, for example, I work with kids, 11, 12, 13 years old, and they don't know who they are. But they're around a group of kids, and their parents are there, their coaches are there, their teammates are there, and they don't want to look incompetent. They're trying to develop a self-image. So there is a lot of pressure on them to be able to look like they know what they're doing. They don't want to look foolish in front of their peers, because sometimes kids can be very cruel, and they're trying to avoid that at all costs. They want to avoid that. We go up to, say, a teenager now, let's say 16, 17-year-old teenager who is great in practice. I mean, they can do virtually anything in practice. but they get to a ball game and they completely lose it. It's like they never played the game before. It's a phenomenon. And so then what I have experienced with many of my teenage clients is that they're afraid that they're not going to go to the next level, which in their case is a D1 institution to play college golf or college baseball or football or softball or whatever it is they want to do. They're afraid that they're not going to live up to these giant expectations that everybody has put on top of them. And then therefore, the fear then is the cause of their failure. It's the cause of their failure because they're afraid that they're not going to get that scholarship. See, if they keep striking out, they're not going to college. And that can be enormous. That can be an enormous weight on their shoulders. And lastly, a professional athlete, I work with several PGA Tour players, and so their fear is loss of livelihood. I mean, you want to talk about fear now. So they could be mortgaged to the hilt, and all of a sudden they've got a 6-foot putt that could, be several $100,000. And if they miss this putt, or if they continue to miss these putts, then their livelihood is gone. So it's just, this is where the fear of failure comes from. And like I said before, it kind of, in my experience, it depends on the level of athlete that you're talking about, which in my world is their age.
Let's talk a little bit more about these levels of athletes and how the age does play
Yes.
into this fear of failure. So you were mentioning you work with younger athletes that do experience this a lot. Is it different from older athletes? Did they all kind of have to overcome this to get to their level?
It's an interesting question because some athletes have no fear. They look for the last shot, right? They want to have the last shot at a basketball rim. They want that. But that is why there are very, very few athletes like that. Simone Biles, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, all of these people, they want to get in that situation. Most people, even most great athletes, are trying to avoid that they don't want that situation. They have to deal with that situation. And that's when people that's when I come into play. When they can't get to the next level and they're working their guts out, and they've bought all the new equipment they can buy, they've got all the coaches they can hire, and they still can't get any better. That's when I'm like the last rung on the ladder, it seems like. And so that's when they come to me and say, well, it's got to be my mental game. And to make it clear, I don't work with them as far as their mental illness. None of my athletes are mentally ill, but their mental health is maybe a little bit off, meaning that they're not balanced. I mean, all of their eggs seemingly are in one basket. They have everything tied up in this identity of being nothing more than a great athlete. They have forgotten who they are. So then, therefore, if they have a bad day on the golf course, if they have a bad day on the mat or the basketball court, they have a bad day, period. And that is the connection between mental health and athletics right there. When there is no dividing line between who a person is and their athleticism, then we got a problem. We got a problem right there.
I'd like to backtrack on something that you did say within your last answer. I mean, the mind is quite a complicated subject, even to try to study it. You had mentioned that some athletes have no fear. Some of them, and most people, do have this fear. What attributes to that? Is it something about how they grew up? Is it something that they're born with? Do we even know?
Well, so nobody really knows. I think that it may have something to do with a combination of this whole nurture and nature thing that we've known about for many decades. Some people are just born confident. I think, in fact, I believe it has been identified as a confidence gene. And so if that is the case, some people just, they strut like a rooster all day long. They are just confident people. Other people have been trained. Tiger Woods is a perfect example. His father trained him at a very early age, certainly at the most vulnerable times of learning. I think birth to about 6 or 7 years old, something in that neighborhood, to let him know that he was going to be the greatest golfer to ever live. And Tiger believed it. Now, whether or not he is or not is debatable. But the point is that he has made it clear that when he goes to a golf tournament, he's there to win. I would venture to say, in fact, I know, at least the clients that I work with, they are looking for a good showing. They're not necessarily there to win. They're there for a good showing. So then, therefore, you have a very special athlete, a Tiger Woods, again, a Michael Jordan. All they want to do is win, and they don't mind the pressure. They look for the pressure. So whether or not it's a genetic component, which I believe that a lot of it is, or maybe it's a combination of genetics and then the way they were brought up, maybe it's some kind of a combination there, leads to a person that, I mean, think of a person running into a burning fire. What kind of person does that? You see, it takes a very special person to be able to do that, and then they have to be trained in order to be able to do that. But not everybody is going to run into a burning house. So that takes a little bit of a different kind of a mentality to do that.
And I do want to ask you, how do people overcome this fear of failure? I can imagine that once you hit that mental block, you almost feel like you've hit the end of your rope, that it's not going to get better. It can really put people in a dark place. What is it that you do with your athletes, with the people that you work with during your mental health trainings and all of that? What do you tell them are the steps they need to take so that they can overcome this and really achieve their goals?
Well, every individual is different. So we have to try to get to the root of the problem. What is the core issue here? Right now, I am working with a client who is an Olympic athlete, terrified, absolutely terrified, before she worked with me, terrified of not making the team. So that's what she was terrified. That's all she thought about was the what ifs. That's all she thought about. What if I don't? What if, what if, what if? Because she had dedicated her entire life to this sport. Now that it's time to show what she can do, she was not focused on what she needed to accomplish. Now, this is the key right here, or this is a key now, a major key. She was not focused on what do I need to do in order to have a great performance. This happened in various tournaments. And this happened several months ago when I first got with her. So then I identified this. She was terrified that her dream of getting through the trials was not going to happen because she was so invested into this dream. So then that's the core. You see, that's the core of the problem. There was no dividing line between her and her as an athlete. So then I asked her to do something other than the sport. Just do anything, right? Gardening, volunteer work, anything that she could do something in some spare time to try to work her way away from the sport just a little bit. And she did that. And actually, the very interesting part was that once she started taking a little time away from the sport, she started to improve. Now, that is an irony, right? I mean, that's not supposed to happen. But in her case, she was already an expert. What else was there for her to learn? And the answer was nothing. So she was in a maintenance program. So then, therefore, she took a step back from the sport. And then there was now a dividing line between her as a young woman and her as an athlete. So that was the first step in her case, was that right there. Step number 2 is, how is she communicating in her mind? And how she was communicating was total outcome thinking. Now, what outcome thinking was, is thinking about the worst case scenario. What if I don't? What if this? What if this happens? And so I got her away from that immediately. Immediately got away from that. So no longer was she thinking about, if I don't get past this, I'm going to be considered a failure. I don't know what I'm going to do. So that kind of language in your mind creates terrible anxiety. Anxiety is another word for worry. You're worried about something. What are you worried about? I'm worried about that all this time, effort, energy I put into this thing is going to go to waste. I have wasted years of my life. That is what I am terrified of. Okay, fine. Yeah, so then stop focusing on that. And I want you to focus on what you've been doing for the last 12 years, day in and day out. And then I want you to focus on your technique and focus on maybe even the feel or the imagery of what it is that you need to do. Well, you know what? Because she was so dedicated, it didn't take her long. And now she has reached her goal. So now we can see if we can get her past the next stage. But that was it. And the most fascinating part was that all up until this point, up to this time, she had never even heard of outcome thinking versus process thinking, which is the thing that I just described. No one had ever discussed that with her until I have come along just a few months ago. Isn't that fascinating?
It is.
It's fascinating. She
And
could
we're
get that
learning.
far, just talent.
Right. And we're learning more about it every day as more athletes kind of open up with these struggles that they deal with deep inside, that perhaps before there was some shame in that, because you are expected to perform and to be at the top of your game. And I do like this point that you made where it's important for people to take a step back and realize that their expertise is not who they are, rather what they do. And there is so much more to them. So failure is something that's going to happen to everybody, but it is not the end of the world, and you can still achieve your goals. Dr. Richard, I'm going to leave you here with the last word. If you had to say one thing to someone who is struggling with this fear of failure, this mental block, when people go through that, it's hard for them to be able to think too many things. So if they have to focus on one thing to get to the next step, what would that be?
Well, you have got to have a friend here. Because if you got an enemy up here constantly accusing you, constantly telling you that you're not good enough, constantly comparing yourself to other people, constantly calling yourself names, constantly criticizing, you're not good enough, always critical, here, you got no chance. You got no chance. I tell my clients, get off of your back. If you're doing your best, just get off your back, okay? You got to have a friend up here to support yourself. You have to support yourself. I'll be okay. I'll be okay. In fact, I'll tell my clients, look, what's the worst case scenario, right? That you don't make the team? Okay, then what? What happens if you don't make the team? Are you just going to lay down and die? The answer is no. You're going to continue on. So then, therefore, I forced them seemingly to look at the dragon in the room. I forced them to look at it. This is the fear here that you're not going to make the team. And you know what? If you don't make the team, you're going to be okay. Now, facing that fear is a very powerful thing, extremely powerful. That thing right there is my fear. And you know what? I'll be okay. If it doesn't happen, I'll be okay. I mean, it's been almost like a giant weight comes off of their shoulders once they get to that point of, I'm okay. I'm going to be okay without this sport. I will still function as a human being without this sport. And you know what? I'm going to flourish and I'm going to be successful in whatever I do. Wow. With that kind of revelation in their head that the sport is no longer holding them hostage, boom, the chains of anxiety seem to float away. That is powerful stuff. So I'm saying to any athlete who feels that way, your coach is not going to tell you. They don't know anything about sports. Your parents, that's the wrong source to go to. You got to find somebody that you can communicate with that is telling you things that I am mentioning or something similar to that, who is objective, who is a professional, who knows what they're doing. And this is not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of weakness. Simone Biles is the greatest gymnast that ever lived, and she sought out therapy. But this is not really, I don't even like to call it therapy. I just like to call it mental coaching. So it is not a weakness. In fact, it shows that you have a lot more brains than everybody else in the room because you are acknowledging that you can only go so far with your talent. It takes your mind to take you to the next level and the next level and the next level and the next level. At that point, the sport is about 90% mental. You got to have a mental coach.
And I think that that is a good note to end this song. Dr. Richard Trammel, we appreciate your time here today to speak on a very important topic that, of course, we're going to be hearing more of as the years go by and more people feel comfortable to talk about the things that they're afraid of and to talk about what it takes to overcome those fears. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.